Ah, there you are. I have been waiting for you. Grab a chair and your favorite drink and sit back and enjoy. Let's begin. Braylon's boot sank 4 inches into the north pasture. The earth didn't just hold water, it refused to let go. It sucked at his leather with a greedy, wet sound, pulling him down with every step. He tightened his grip on the fence post. The wood was slick, coated in a slime of algae and rot that grew faster than the grass this season. He heaved. His right knee clicked, a sharp mechanical snap like a dry twig breaking inside a wet sack. Pain shot up his thigh, hot and familiar. He didn't move. He waited for the heat to slide up his hip, his jaw locked until the muscle jumped. Then he shoved the post into the dark earth. The soil here was wrong. It was too black, too soft. 26 years ago, a sorcerer had died on this spot, and the ground still hadn't decided if it wanted to be fertile or poisonous. Weeds grew thick as a man's wrist, but they tasted like ash. Sheep that grazed too long in this corner birthed lambs with too many eyes or none at all. Braylon meaned his weight against the wood, panting. The rain ran down the back of his neck, cold and relentless. It smelled of a struck match and wet dog. The sky above the gray marches was the color of a fresh bruise, promising a storm that would likely strip the last of the barley before he could harvest it. He looked at his hands. They were wide, scarred, and permanently stained with the dark earth. The nails were cracked. These were not the hands of the man in the songs. These were the hands of a man who owed money to people who didn't care about dragons or shadows. He tested the post. It wobbled. "Good enough," he said. The wind snatched the words away. He turned back toward the farmhouse. It sat on the rise like a dying animal, its roofline sagging in the middle, the shingles peeling back like scabbed skin. Smoke struggled to rise from the chimney, beaten down by the downdraft. It was the only thing he owned, and even that was a technicality the bank was trying to correct. The walk back was a negotiation with his own skeleton. Step, click, drag, step, click, drag. The rhythm was the only music he had left. He reached the porch and stomped the worst of the mud from his boots. The wood of the deck was soft with rot. He'd meant to replace the boards 3 winters ago. He'd meant to do a lot of things. A square of parchment slapped against the door, pinned there with a cruel iron tack. Braylon stared at it. The rain had already soaked the edges, but the wax seal of the mayor's office repelled the water. It sat there, red and arrogant. He didn't need to read it to know what it said. Foreclosure was a word that didn't need spelling out. It had a shape. He pulled the tack free. The paper felt heavy, like it was woven from lead. He pushed the door open. The warmth of the kitchen hit him, smelling of damp wool and the sharp chemical tang of glue. Miriam sat at the rough-hewn table. The light from the single tallow candle threw long, dancing shadows against the walls. She didn't look up when he entered. Her attention was fixed on a pile of sharp porcelain shards spread out before her. Braylon limped to the sideboard. The debt ledger lay open, a thick book with a spine broken from overuse. He placed the wet notice on top of the open page, covering the column of red ink that tallied the cost of seed he couldn't afford and tools he couldn't fix. "Bank runner came by," Miriam said. Her voice was tight. She held a small brush, applying a pungent adhesive to the edge of a jagged white piece. "I saw." Braylon stripped off his soaked cloak and hung it by the fire. Steam rose from the wool immediately. "Tea?" "We're out of tea. We have hot water and imagination." She pressed 2 shards together, holding them with the steady hands of a surgeon. "Or we could boil some pine needles and pretend we're druids." Braylon grunted and poured a mug of hot water from the kettle. He wrapped his cold fingers around the clay cup, letting the heat seep into his joints. He watched her work. The sculpture was taking shape, something abstract, twisting and sharp. It looked like a splash of milk frozen in time. She found the pieces at the sunken obelisk, trash left by locals smashing plates on the monument of the dead. She brought them home and made them into things that didn't have names. "Mayor Holloway wants the land for the stagecoach," Braylon said. He took a sip. The water tasted of iron. "Says the grade is better through the north pasture." "The north pasture is a bog, Dad." Miriam didn't look away from her work. "If they run a train through there, it'll sink before it reaches the tree line. He just wants you off the hill." "He can want. He can take." Miriam finally looked up. Her eyes were dark and hard. She had her mother's chin, but his stubbornness. "I read the ledger. We missed the payment on the thresher, again, and the tax assessment came in higher because of the historical value of the land." "Historical value?" Braylon said, his voice a low rumble. "It's a graveyard with a mortgage." "It's a story," Miriam said. She set the brush down. "That's what Holloway is selling, the site where the great Braylon Godwin struck down the Blight King. Tourists will pay to see the hole in the ground. They won't pay to see sheep with hoof rot." "I'm not selling." "Then we're starving." She gestured to the notice on the ledger. "That's not a request. That's a countdown. We have maybe 2 weeks before the sheriff comes to nail boards over the windows." Braylon set his cup down. The ceramic clinked loudly in the quiet room. "I'll talk to Jory. There might be some work hauling stone for the new bridge." "Hauling stone?" Miriam laughed, a short, brittle sound. "Dad, you can barely walk to the barn. I heard your knee from here. You're going to haul stone?" "I do what needs doing. You do what kills you slowly." She picked up another shard, turning it over in her fingers. "I heard a bard in the village today, at the Blue Cask. He was singing that song again." Braylon stiffened. The muscles in his back locked up. "Don't." "The Song of 17, she continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And there he stood, the boy of gold, with sunlight in his hair. He laughed at death, he broke the night, and left it bleeding there." She looked at him, her gaze traveling from his receding, gray-streaked hair to the mud-caked boots. "He laughed, Dad. Did you laugh?" "It was a long time ago." "They say you were perfect, that you swung the Blight Slayer like it was a feather, and the monsters just fell down because they were afraid of your purity." She slammed the shard onto the table. "Look at you. You use the sword to pry rocks out of the garden. You can't lift a grain sack without turning gray. Why do you let them lie like that?" "Because the truth doesn't help the crops grow, Miriam." "The truth might explain why we're living in a ruin." She stood up, the chair scraping violently against the floorboards. "If you were a hero, where's the gold? Where's the pension? Where's the magic that's supposed to fix everything? Either you're the worst negotiator in history, or the whole war was just a bar fight that got out of hand." "Enough." Braylon's voice wasn't loud, but it had a density to it, as a stone dropped in a well. Miriam stared at him, her chest heaving. Then she grabbed her coat. "I'm going to the root cellar. We need potatoes, if there are any left that haven't turned to mush." She walked out the back door, letting the wind slam it shut. Braylon stood in the silence. The house creaked, settling into the mud. He looked at the debt ledger. The numbers were neat, precise, and damning. He looked at the porcelain sculpture. It was beautiful, in a jagged way. It was made of broken things glued together to look whole. He couldn't stay in the house. The air was too thick with things he couldn't say. He grabbed his cloak. It was still wet, heavy and cold against his shoulders. He shoved his feet back into his boots and went out into the night. The rain had softened to a drizzle, a fine mist that clung to his eyelashes. The dark was absolute. The moon was buried behind layers of storm clouds. He navigated by memory and the squelch of the ground underfoot. He headed for the hives. Most men kept dogs or cats. Braylon kept bees. There was an honesty to them. They had a job, they did it, and if you crossed them, they stung you. No politics, no banks, just wax, honey, and the work. He approached the white wooden boxes stacked near the orchard wall. Usually, at night, the hives were silent. The colony slept, or whatever bees did that passed for sleep. A low warmth usually radiated from the boxes. Tonight, there was a sound. It wasn't a buzz, it was a drone, a low mechanical vibration that he felt in his teeth before he heard it with his ears. It sounded like a heavy wire pulled to the breaking point and plucked. Braylon stopped 5 feet away. "Easy, girls," he whispered. He stepped closer. The sound grew louder. It wasn't chaotic. It was rhythmic. Thrum, thrum, thrum. He placed his hand on the lid of the main hive. The wood was vibrating, but it wasn't the erratic shaking of an agitated swarm. It was precise. The bees were moving in unison inside, marching in lines, turning at sharp angles. A memory surfaced from the deep, silted bottom of his mind. The Apis divination. An old farmer near the front lines had told him once, while they waited for the shadow to crest the hill. Bees know the fabric, boy. When the fabric tears, they try to stitch it back together. If they dance in circles, the sun is good. If they dance in squares, run. Braylon pulled his hand back. Squares, he breathed. The air pressure dropped. His ears popped. A strobe of white-gray light cut through the timber. It wasn't lightning. Lightning flashed. This occurred. It was a negative pulse, a sudden absence of color that made the night look gray by comparison. It came from the direction of the veil rift, deep in the timber, where the trees grew twisted and the birds refused to nest. The pulse washed over the farm. For a second, the sound of the rain stopped. The drone of the hive cut out. Silence clamped down on the world like a heavy hand. Then a sound tore the quiet. Bleat! It came from the paddock. His prize ewe, the one with the good wool, the one he needed to lamb in the spring if he was going to pay the interest on the loan. Braylon spun around. His boot slipped in the mud, but he caught himself on the orchard wall. "Hey!" he shouted. His voice sounded thin, swallowed by the damp air. He saw the shape of the ewe near the fence line. She was standing rigid, staring toward the woods. The air around the sheep shimmered. It looked like heat haze on a summer road, but it was freezing cold. The distortion rippled, folding inward. The sheep didn't run. It didn't fight. It just faded. First the legs, then the body, then the head. The space where the animal stood simply ceased to contain the animal. There was a sharp pop of displaced air, and then nothing. 50 silvers, the interest payment, winter fuel. No! He pushed off the wall. Instinct, dormant for 2 decades, flared to life. He wasn't a farmer with a bad knee. He was the vanguard. He was the point of the spear. He launched himself forward, driving his legs into the mud, reaching for the animal. He took 3 strides, fast, hard. On the 4th stride, his body remembered the truth. His lower back seized. It wasn't a cramp. It was a structural failure. It felt like someone had swung a hammer into his lumbar spine. The muscles locked instantly, turning into iron bands that snapped his posture rigid. His legs went out from under him. He hit the mud face first. The impact knocked the wind out of his lungs in a wet grunt. Mud filled his mouth. The taste of copper and rot flooded his tongue. He lay there, trying to draw breath into a chest that felt crushed. The pain in his back was a blinding white noise, drowning out the rain and the wind. He tried to push up. His arms shook. His spine refused to bend.
He was a statue toppled in the dirt.
"Get up," he wheezed. He clawed at the ground, dragging himself forward by his elbows. He had to see. He had to know. He pulled himself to where the sheep had been. The paddock was empty. The animal was gone. There was no blood, no signs of struggle, no wolf tracks. Braylon wiped the mud from his eyes. He looked at the ground. The mud wasn't churned up. It was pressed down. Where the sheep had stood, the earth had been stamped with a pattern. It was perfectly smooth, the mud compressed into hard, geometric lines. A triangle intersecting a circle, with 3 jagged lines radiating outward. It looked machine-tooled. It looked like math was used as a weapon. Braylon stared at the mark. The rain filled the grooves, turning the sigil into a black mirror. A throb started in his left shoulder, then in his right hip, then along the jagged scar on his temple. It wasn't the dull ache of the weather. It was a sharp, biting itch, a phantom sensation of teeth and claws that weren't there. The shadow ache. It had been 20 years. He had told himself it was gone. He had told himself the nerves were just dead. He rolled onto his side, the mud coating one half of his face like a mask. He looked toward the northern woods. The trees were still. The light was gone, but the darkness between the trunks felt heavier now. It felt like it was watching back. "Miriam," he whispered. He tried to stand, but his knees wouldn't hold him. He stayed in the mud, shivering, while the bees in the white box resumed their drone. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It sounded like a war drum beating a retreat.